Ladies and... Is it working?
Yeah, we're good.
Ladies and gentlemen. Unjani. What else do I know? Maneru. I nobody from that world. How else do you greet in your languages? Let me hear it from Chad real quick. Give me one.
Salam alaikum, bonjour, bonsoir.
Man, you just gave me Arabic and French. Peter, are we gonna be okay? We good? What is this thing? Is it outside? Oh, okay. I thought we were having a sound problem. All right, cool. We had a... Well, I'm a project. We had an African tea time just prior to this, which is why we had that set up over there. But also it is the reason for our little delay. I try to disrupt that narrative about African time as much as I can. So wanted to start right at 6, but here we are. So let me start off by, giving a quick vote of thanks. Some folks will leave earlier, so I just want to make sure that we mention, in the true spirit of Ubuntu and the way we get together in African spaces, those who have helped to make this possible. So first of all, I want to thank myself. Worked extra hard. No, I'm joking. No, I'm playing. First of all, I want to thank the African Studies Center, which is right downstairs. If you guys haven't stopped by there, you should, just to show your face. The African Studies Center, which helped fund this event. It's part of the Year of Global Africa, which is the initiative that's been running for the past year or so. And this is how they're funding this event, as well as other events that are happening around campus and beyond. So thank you to the African Studies Center. I want to thank the Sankofa Graduate Student Union, of which I'm a part of, but also a couple of beautiful people in the back there also ride with that. That's the representative student body for the graduate students in African American and African Studies program, which we just got word that is going to be a department. So give a round of applause to us. It's major. I want to thank the African Graduate Student Association and the members in the His House. AXA members in the house.
Of course.
There's like 3. Do we have BGSA in the house? BSA in the house? All right, well represented. And the African Student Union? All right. That's also, I want to thank you guys. It's a labor of love. And, I think student collaboration on any level is fantastic and is essential. It's a vital part of the learning process that is always so understated. But with this topic in particular, it is very important that we have buy-in from the this is not one of those where we are preaching to the choir sort of things. We really need to get our teeth into this meat and potatoes, right? We really need to get to the bottom of these issues. So I really thank you guys for coming out. I also know that we have ASLA represented. I know we have Rising Black Men represented. I know we have Daughters of the Collective represented. So it's such a beautiful show of, I know we have Manners represented, who have a program that stole our name, but it will be on Monday. So what I want to, a couple of logistical things. We have a sign-in sheet in the back. So whenever you get up to get food or when you're leaving, or if you haven't done so already, please make sure you sign into that. That will just, this goes along with our funding to just show that people were actually there. And also we have flyers for the various events back there. So make sure you grab flyers, so you stay abreast of other events that are coming up. But also based on that signing, based on those emails that you put on there, is I'm going to share the resource list we've been building. So what I did was when I was talking to our collaborators and the panelists, I asked what books, movies, articles, any resources that talk about the relationship between African and African descendant communities can you recommend to me? So I've been building that list in Google Docs. So if you're interested in receiving that, it's so far it's looking pretty good. So thank you to everybody who submitted articles and books. But we're going to continue working on it as time goes on. But if you want me to share that document with you, if you're going to be teaching or if you want to just reference them yourselves, it's going to be a beautiful resource. So make sure you put your email there. Yes, I won't talk too much further. Please make sure you eat the food and whatnot. But we're going to start real quick with a 2-minute video. And now this video, the story of this is I was having lunch with the director of the African Studies Center 2 weeks ago. This event was already in play, right? And she gets this email, and they're talking about this award-winning documentary that just came out, and it's called Black and Black. It's like, wow, this is fateful, right? So that movie, they are now buying it, and it's going to be hosted in the library, this documentary. It's won some awards and things like that. So this is the trailer to it, and I felt that I was going to do a little bit of introducing the topic, but I felt this 2-minute trailer does a great job of doing that. Then after that, we're going to call our panelists up here, and we're going to get into it. Sharif, can you hit the lights for me? Okay, yeah, that may be good.
I have somebody ask me one time, have I seen a liar? I asked them, what about you? Have you seen a liar?
Hated it. My dad always has an accent, and people are, treating him as if he's not intelligent when this man speaks 5 languages.
Ils sont paresseux, ils ne veulent pas travailler, et puis ils accusent le gouvernement.
All we knew was that white people had gone to Africa and went to the bush and stole people, kidnapped people, and threw them on a ship and brought them over here. But to find out that we were complicit in it, I tell you, it was heartbreaking.
I don't think we should allow 300 years history still be ruling us now.
People would call me a rude, and I'd say, no, I'm a person of African descent.
Ce qui fait l'Afrique, c'est pas forcément la couleur.
For whatever reason, white folk find it far more comfortable to deal with Africans than they do with African Americans.
There's an idea that some of that baggage of my ancestors may have owned your ancestors doesn't exist.
The idea, you're safe, or the idea of, that we articulate, or more discipline. All those things are being used to create this buffer.
Nous, Africains qui sommes aux États-Unis ici, on ne sort pas pour manifester, les aider à manifester, quoi. Oui, ça c'est vrai.
This is a direct result of Africans feeling like it's not their struggle.
For every African immigrant, whatever job they're in right now, if they're doing what they love to do or what they dreamt of doing, it's because of what African Americans did.
After all that history, there's still that desire, for Africans and African Americans to connect.
What is the future of Africa? And what is the future of African Americans?
All right. So, like I said, that is an award-winning movie. It's won received the Henry Hampton Award for Documentary Excellence at the Roxbury International Film Festival, and will soon screen at Wellesley College in Massachusetts and at the North Carolina Black Film Festival. So it's just fresh off the press. But it's one of the things that I'll be sharing in that document if anybody's interested about accessing that. So without further ado, I'd like to call upon our panelists to come and take their place up here. then we'll just do the introductions. Then 1, 2, 4. We're supposed to have Naomi. Did you talk to Naomi at all?
Yes, she said she was coming.
She said she was coming. All right, so this is unprecedented, right? So we have 2 people who are not here. But we're just talking about our lived experiences. This is not like a professional sort of thing. So I need, if you would, humor me.
What do you need? You need a Nigerian?
Oh, yeah, okay, yeah. Well, I have a Nigerian already. You Nigerian? Like a real one? All right.
I'll tip the scale.
Yeah.
I'll come in as an African American.
Well, no. African American is fine.
One? Okay, I'll be the second one.
No, you're Nigerian, bro. All right, sounds good. And if, I'm a little more confident about Naomi showing up at some point than I am about the other guy. So Naomi can just fill in the, so that we have some sort of gender and some semblance of balance. So we have, starting from the furthest right, we have Michaela Smith, who is a senior studying zoology and environmental and sustainability studies, and she currently serves as the treasurer to the African Students Union. Right. Next up, we have Jayla Woman, who is a second-year doctoral student in the Writing, Rhetoric, and American Cultures program. Her research focuses on writing and design practices of African Americans in a professional context. She is a member of the BGSA and an advisor of the student organization Daughters of the Collective. Next up, we have Joe Enwejobi. Is a senior in interdisciplinary studies and is the treasurer of the Black Student Alliance. Next to him, we have Tim Hurd, who is a fourth-year education major and is the founder and current president of Rising Black Men. And next to him, we have my man.
I'll introduce myself. Hi, I'm Obafemi, and just finished from Community Sustainability. I'm also the Regional Vice President for Minorities in Agricultural and Natural Resources for the whole Big Ten. And I think that's about it. Okay. Yep.
Is that the same organization you represent? Manners? Okay, all right.
Manners. Yep, there you
go. Yeah, okay, all right. That's awesome. Well, thank you so much to give him a round of applause. This is not an easy conversation to be having, and for folks to just step up and want to have this conversation and agree to be live streamed as well. We're live streaming on the African Studies Center Facebook page. He's a wanted man. He's wanted in several places. But yeah, well, maybe starting with Obafemi, then we can get into our questions. So what I want to do is we have a few questions that are core questions that we'll discuss, see where that goes. Then after we go through these half a dozen questions, we'll throw it open to you guys, and you can ask as well. You can chime in as well on this conversation. So let's do that. So we've already introduced yourselves briefly, right? But can you introduce yourself in the context of your Black identity, and perhaps tell us what your exposure to and perceptions of other groups, which would be if you're African American, what your exposure to African folks has been, and the other way around. And we're talking about growing up, though. We're not necessarily talking about the Damascus moment that you may or may not have had, but definitely talking about what your exposure was growing up. So we can start with you and go down this way.
Hi, my name is Afrochella again, and great question, by the way. And it's one question that I actually enjoy talking about the question, just because I came to America when I was 14, and now I'm 35, so I've been in the States for. Okay, so I came to America when I was 14, and I've been in the States for about 21 years. And when I got here, I was like, oh, you're the African guy, so I got the lion questions and all of that stuff. And I never considered myself Black. I was like, just because of the understanding of what Black is, I was like, nope, that's not me. And then 21 years later, you know, no, 19 years later, my father is now like, yo, Buffett, you came to the States and you hated African Americans and black people. And now you're gonna get married to one. What happened? I was like, yeah, Dad, a lot has changed over the 20 years. So over the 20 years, I got to understand that like being black is actually a combination of a lot of things. And eventually, the longer you stay in America, the more you realize that you're actually not much different from other people. We might speak different languages, we might come from different places, but we're still going to be treated the same. We're still going to be pulled over by the same people. We're still going to go to the same jobs, and people they're going to look at us like we're stupid. And you're still going to get the same treatment. So in the beginning, we're always like, no, I'm not the black people. And then years later, you're like, oh, okay. All of us, we're all getting fired. We're all getting pulled over. Like, did you get pulled over? Yeah, me too. Why? And that's how that happens.
So again, my name is Tim Hurd, and for me, growing up, you got it. Cool. All right, yeah, cool. All right, so yeah, for me growing up personally, I didn't have a lot of interactions with people who were identified as Africa or who were straight from Africa. So like growing up, I grew up in Detroit. It's predominantly black, filled with like African Americans, and for me, my experiences, I learned a lot about African American culture and African American history. But I didn't learn anything about African history and how rich and vast Africa was as a continent. And a lot of the times when I thought about Africa, when I was younger, the narrative that was often formed or shaped was Africa was a poor, desolate place. And they didn't have any resources and everybody there was poor. And that's kind of something that I grew up upon. And it wasn't really until I got to college that I was able to have that paradigm shift and see that there were people from Africa who were doing well, and people who were coming here who were doctors and lawyers and other things and professionals of different things. So for me, yeah, that was a big thing.
Hello, everybody. Again, my name is Joseph or Joby. I'm 100% Nigerian. However, I identify myself as Nigerian American only because I was born and raised here. Growing up, it was kind of like a straight divide. It was, excuse me. It was more so always the aspect of I'm too, African to be black, or I'm too black to be African. It was kind of like that struggle within myself and within the community, trying to like figure out where I actually belong, because I was always invested in my African roots, but because I've been always around black people, I was also invested in African American roots too. So growing up, that's always been a struggle, but in college specifically is where like I found myself and found my place, and kind of like found like a common ground for both. So it's kind of like an overall background of me.
Hi everyone, my name is Jayla Warman. So for me, my story is a little different, as all of ours is. I'm a military brat, so I was born in Chicago. My parents are native Detroiters, but I grew up overseas. I spent majority of my childhood in Japan, well, in Hawaii, and then my adolescence and my teenage years in Japan before I moved here to Michigan to start college and graduate studies. So growing up, just because being in a military family, my perception of just people in general, race, ethnicity, it was never like this divide, because I was always surrounded by different races and ethnicities and backgrounds. But I don't believe that I really knew there was a difference between African Americans and Africans. Growing up, my parents made sure we learned about African Americans. We had lots of biographies. We had to do like reports and studies, because they knew we're not growing up in the States, so we need to know like our history and our culture. But it wasn't until college, I think, that I began to meet people who identified as Africans. And I guess I was surprised because I didn't look at them. I was like, oh, what do you mean you're like from this country? I just thought they were black like me, African American. And it wasn't until college, I think, I started to actually learn more about the differences of, different African countries and things of that. So that was like my first exposure, realization, because for me, I just was so used to meeting people from all over, I didn't see a difference.
Hey you all. So I would say that when I was very young, I would say that I thought a little bit similarly to Tim, having a lot of misconceptions about the continent of Africa itself. But I think also growing up in my childhood, I always had proximity to like African neighbors, African friends, African classmates and things like that. So to me, like black was black. Even though I knew we were from different places and like we kind of did things differently, ate food differently, stuff like that, we were still black. So I think like my investment in my own heritage and my history kind of led me into learning about African people, the African diaspora, the African continent, and things like that. Also because of my proximity, I think, to Africans growing up, I didn't really understand that there were divides like between the two communities until I got to college. Because being at MSU was the first time I think I actually had proximity to an African community, not just to African individuals and African families. So yeah, it's been something that's like I've been interested in for a really long time.
All right, thank you guys for sort of setting the ground work for this. So to get right into the nitty gritties, right? Whence cometh this schisms? well, what is the source of these misunderstandings? I guess that's the question. Why is there a disconnect between the two communities, and what do you think have hindered the relationships between the two groups? And we keep talking about these two groups, knowing very well that there's other black communities, there's a Caribbean community, right? There's other different communities as well. So maybe when you open it up, folks can chime in if they represent that group or if they know a little bit about that group. But a lot of the conflict stems from probably maybe from similar places, but this is what we're about to find out. So where do you think this conflict comes from? And we can just do sort of popcorn style if you have any input on that. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
This is this. No.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So, just going off of that, there's what I've really seen in college, specifically. So I didn't have a lot of interaction with African students prior to coming to college. So when I came to Michigan State, it was really my first actual encounter with people who identified as African or who were from different African nations. And one of the biggest things that I saw that because I was an intercultural aide, so I had to talk to international students, and a lot of the international students who I was working with were MasterCard students, and the majority of the MasterCard students, if not all of the MasterCard students, came from different African countries, and they were here on scholarships of some sort. And it was really through this exposure that I really first had my first conversations with African students, and a lot of the things we had shared similar experiences, but there was a lack of communication, and there was a lack of communication in the community, the Michigan State community as a whole, and that was something that I saw. Some things such as, black or African students think that black Americans are loud or lazy, or they don't go to class, so narratives like that. And then from the African American side, it being, African students think they're stuck up, or they're quiet, or they're shy, they don't talk. And not understanding that there's different cultures and there's different norms of what's normal to each individual. So coming over here, you have like this self-fulfilling prophecy of, an example would be, African students are stuck up or they're lazy, they're not gonna say anything to me. And an instance that I can give is like maybe being in the cafeteria or in a dorm, and it's a group of African Americans hanging out, and there's an African student or there's two African students over on the side by themselves, and you're looking at them, and you don't invite them over, but you're looking at them, you're like, I bet they won't come over and talk to me. So not having that lack of communication, and that lack of communication builds this resentment, and it self-fulfills this prophecy of, they were lazy, or they weren't going to talk to me to begin with. So with there's that lack of communication, there's a lot of narratives that can come to fruition, and a lot of stereotypes that get applied to one another. And one of the things in order to address that is just through conversation like this. And this is a great place to start with that. So.
Yeah, really good. So some of the things you actually said, I'm going to touch on, but very briefly. But I'm going to use my own personal experience to answer the question. So I'm coming to America at age 14. My parents are like, hey, listen, when you get to America, avoid black people. Just avoid them. And I'm not like, why would my parents say such a thing? But then I look back at what informed my parents' decision to tell me that? So then, now that I look back, I'm like, my parents watched the news. They watch CNN, they watch whatever cable news they're watching back then. And what they report of America and of Black Americans is negative. All they see is shooting in Chicago, Black Americans doing drugs. In fact, the only Black American that I knew, and we didn't even call it Black Americans, we're just the only successful African American we knew was like Michael Jackson. And then after that, I think it was Michael Jordan from Space Jam. I was like, oh my God, that's dope. And we never heard about Martin Luther King. We never heard about Malcolm X. We're not taught African American history in Nigeria. We're probably taught, I think, more British history. Some people might attest to that. And some of the schools we went to. So the only thing we knew about African Americans was they are violent and they're lazy. So we're coming with this stereotype of these people are what television portrays them to be. Now, I get to America, I'm 14. Now I'm watching TV and I'm watching CNN. And then CNN is reporting about Africa. What are they showing about Africa? Okay. They're showing like some poor kid, starved, skinny, and in some desert somewhere, and then they're dying of HIV, AIDS, and then, donate $2. This kid is gonna get an education. And I'm looking like, that's not in my context, the Nigeria I know. The Nigeria I know, yes, there's poverty, but that's not what I grew up with. I grew up with cars, houses, things like that. So African Americans would come to me like, oh my God, where you running with lions? And then, me with my smart mouth, oh my God, where you running with drugs? And then we get in a fight. So it's in my mind, I was like, that's the way. So when you run into an African American and they're looking at Africans, they don't understand what they're looking at because they're going by what the television and the media portrays Africans to be. When an African runs into an African American, it's the same thing. There's a lack of information on both sides. We're getting played by both sides, by the media. So I look at it as the media. But it takes years. And what he's talking about is absolutely true, and no apologies to Michigan State, but Michigan State is absolutely terrible about that. When I went to Maryland for undergrad. We mixed in, and I don't know what community she grew up in. Maybe she grew up in Chicago, but in Maryland, it was a very tight community. The African Americans, the Caribbeans, we all chilled. When I got to Michigan State, it was awkward. It's like, man, So I think location matters, and where you grew up matters also. But the media plays a big role. And the final point I'll make is, that's why I thank God for like Black Panther. That's the first movie that actually brought together both communities and actually made sense of what both communities are looking at.
I heard somebody say, what about coming to America?
They got a lot of Nigerians papers.
Well, I just wanna chime in too, just to make sure that we keep the conversation going. But also, one of the things you mentioned, right, was that location matters. So maybe even as you guys respond accordingly with your own response, maybe we can also unpack that. What is it about Maryland as opposed to Michigan, right? And then this thing.
Chicago, where are you from?
Yeah. Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
I was actually going to say the exact same thing you said. Like, media plays a very big role. It's not even about the things that you also see in the news. It's how, like, in movies, like I used to grow up watching Nollywood movies, which is like the Hollywood of Nigeria. the way they portray, like, African Americans, they're gangsters, they're doing drugs, they up to no good, and it's literally in almost every single Nollywood movie. Vice versa, like if you see any movie Coming to America or any movie that
Barbershop,
something that like portrays Africans as being like like comedians, like jokes, like in a sense, and that's literally the image that we're perceiving even as young kids seeing these movies. Like people's perceptions change at a very early age, you know what I'm saying? And on top of that, like my parents being immigrants from Nigeria, like they have all these preconceived stereotypes about African Americans and vice versa. Sometimes it would take like that one person out of this, like the statistic or the image, and they'll use that and run with it. Oh, okay, because that one person did it, like that gave like validation that that's how like the whole community is. And it's like a two-way street, you know what I mean? So I feel like once we kind of just, you know, put media aside and these preconceived stereotypes and actually see each other eye to eye and have these conversations, which I'm glad we're doing, that's where we can take a step.
My thoughts, I don't know if we're going to talk about this later, but I wanted to touch on how I feel like white Europeans, you know, how they engage with African Americans when we come to college versus the international community. So I'm thinking about like my experiences being in like campus ministries when I was an undergrad, and how they would gravitate towards the international students, the Africans, and bond with them in a different way and create community with them, but they wouldn't be a part of like maybe the Black students that are in that same campus ministry. So this is even in like the church cultures, like this divide. And I didn't really engage with many Africans in my campus ministry because they were a part of the international student group. So there's already that divide in college because international students have their own orientation and they are and separate organizations are reaching out to them because they're international students. So I feel like there's just a division from the moment, unless you're born here, there's a division already. So if you have this narrative coming to America, and then on the flip side, African Americans with the narrative of what we see on TV, it's like maybe by chance we're in the same rooms, we get to talk, so we get to learn, or you grew up with a neighbor, they invite you to the house, so you see, oh, y'all aren't all the same. So for me, it wasn't until we started being in the same groups in college, I think, that I started to learn that some of the African students coming here had misconceptions. I'm not even sure if I had a misconception, I just think I didn't really know what they were. And then when I started learning, because of college, I'm like, we have a really big issue, and it stems from systemic issues of oppression from both sides, even though people they might not want to say that. They might want to say it's just African Americans. No. It's people of color, Black. If you got a little melanin in your skin, like you're a target. So those are just my thoughts.
Yeah, I'm gonna piggyback off of that. I think that each group has its own very complicated, very unique history. And so sometimes it can be hard for us to give validity and give weight, like equal weight, to somebody else's experience and struggle. Even though it is in some ways very similar to ours, it's very hard for us to come to terms with the fact that we might have been complicit in somebody else's struggle or somebody else's oppression in ways that we might not have intended, or that in certain circumstances we might have privilege over somebody who looks like us but comes from a different place, depending on what the situation might be. So I think a lot of times we have a tendency to get caught up in those superficial conflicts, like, oh, this person did this to me and this is what I experienced and this is how this person treated me, rather than really understanding the roots and the similarities of how we arrived to this point.
Thank you so much for that. So this question, right, I think is a critical one, because a lot of times we have conversations about why things are the way they are
with an assumption that they should be a certain way, you know? So let me ask you this. Do you think it's necessary to establish this rapport between the two groups? And if so, why? Could they possibly just exist as two different groups?
Ultimately, at the end of the day, I definitely think it's necessary. Only because at the end of the day, like previously stated, we are all a target. Like no matter the situation, no matter if you're African or African American, when you get pulled over, they're looking at your skin color. You know what I mean? They don't care. They really don't care. So if that's the case, why not work together? You know, we ultimately might come from different places, but we are the same people. We have the same the same background, the same similarities, the same cultures in a way, you know. Cultures might be different, but there's variations to it, you know what I mean? And we learn from each other. At the end of the day, we still learn from each other, and people are open, and people still need to be open to learning each other, you know what I mean? So I definitely think it's a necessity.
Yeah, I'm gonna definitely say it is a necessity. Like, we are one in the same. Like, our birth story might look different. Our parents, their story might look different. But I mean, culturally, historically, you think about just how African Americans, how we got to this place. You know, our generations, we might not be able to trace back exactly where we're from, but it is within Africa, you know. And if you look at African American culture, a lot of that is derived from different places in Africa, and it's changed a little bit because when our ancestors got to America, they had to adapt, but a lot of the same practices in African American culture is very similar, and it's because those things were passed down. And when we couldn't keep our language, when we couldn't keep, you know, do things a certain way, we had to see, well, how can I do this in America? How can I tweak it but still keep some of that same spirit? And for me, as I've engaged with people from different cultures, you know, I see more of the similarities, which led me to want to do the research I'm doing in my department, because I want to be able to understand these practices. And as I'm learning about African American practices, I'm learning, well, this traces back to Africa, the Caribbean. It doesn't start right here. I'm having to make connections and learn more about African cultures, because African American history is African history. So I think it takes also us taking that step to do our research and to learn and to have conversations and to not be satisfied with, well, I don't know you and we're not from the same place, so that's good. We need to start being more proactive and learning more about each other's history. I heard someone say, you didn't learn about African American history, and we don't learn about African history, so we got to do that work if we're not being taught in school.
Yeah, and going off of that, so at the beginning of the school year, when I created this event called Ubuntu, there was a lot of different people who identified under the African diaspora coming together. And through that, I was just reminded that there's strength in numbers. And then also this fact that Black is not a monolith. So there's different varieties and different cultures and different shared experiences. But knowing these shared experiences, there's something empowering about that. And there's something empowering about coming together. And you don't identify with somebody, but you have this identification of sharing the same heritage in terms of being under the African diaspora. And one of the big things, again, going back with like their strength in numbers, it's also good to talk to people and get other people's experiences about like being, so like as an African American, hearing people who are from Africa and getting their experiences about how it was back in their home country, and then me also sharing my experience about how it was growing up where I grew up from. Having those conversations are fruitful as we advance, because I do think that there needs to be some more collaboration, some more unity within the amongst of African Americans and Africans specifically, because there's so much that we can help one another with. And another thing is, and when we talk about like being like African American, it's kind of like one of the narratives, like you don't know your history. So like as an African American, there's a thing of like African Americans being a monolith. So like grouping all African Americans up together, and it being like, for me, even in class growing up, it's like I was in class with predominantly white people, and they're like, oh, I'm Irish American or I'm Italian American, and for me, it's like, oh, I'm just African American, but Africa's a whole continent. So if I don't have these conversations with people who've had these fruitful experiences in Africa, in these different countries and stuff, then I might still have that same mindset. And that mindset continues to be perpetuated until I have conversations with people who've been from these nations or from other areas where they can get me hip or open my eyes to a lot of other things that are going on. Because like we'll share here, we talk about the media being a big factor or a big component in perpetuating this idea of African Americans being this way and African being that way. But if we don't have that conversation and we don't come together to at least engage in a conversation, then that continues to be perpetuated.
So I was just gonna address the quick point you made earlier, she made earlier, and then I'll get to the question that he asked. You're talking about like in the Christian fellowship, how the Africans gravitated towards the white people and not towards the African Americans. And I'll go back to the media and my own experience. I'll talk about my own experience. When we're watching movies growing up, the person that saved the day was the white guy. So, and then in our community, I went to a Catholic primary school, which is elementary school, and we had Catholic nuns. So we associated white with right. We're right, thank you. That's actually a good way to put it. And so, and of course, not to pick on my parents too much, but they're like, stay away from those people, but you want to associate yourself with those people. And then when you come here, you give them the benefit of doubt. So you're more comfortable with them and all of that. And then also, white folks are always like, as they said earlier, like, oh, the Africans are different. They don't have that kind of history and they're not angry at us. Only for the Africans, like, later on to find out that, oh, you treat us the same. So that's just to address that, and it's that white savior mentality. And in terms of like blacks, African Americans and Africans getting together, all the black people getting together, and what we can learn from each other, it's actually started. And that's the beauty of technology. So there was a viral picture going on everywhere during Afrochella. Did you guys hear about Afrochella? Who heard about Afrochella? Okay, only 2 people. Well, there's something called Coachella, and Coachella is like this. I think it's a music festival. People get together and do their thing. Like and the lady was like, hey, I'm tired of people like coming up to me and like touching my hair. I want to go to a place where my natural hair is not like a big deal. Like people just look at me and just admire that. So she came up with Afrochella, and then through that, the Ghanaian government got involved with it, and then a bunch of black celebrities went to Ghana this Christmas, taking pictures, learning their history, and it was such a huge boost. And they might, I think they're gonna do it again. I was actually pissed off because I was like, Nigeria could have come up with that. We could have killed the game. We could have been much better than the Ghanaians, But that was just me being a proud Nigerian. But I was so jealous. I told my Ghanaian brothers, oh, you guys suck. But that's actually, it started. The question he's asking has started already. And I don't want to give Black Panther too much credit, but the conversation started with Black Panther, and people are going back and they're trying to figure this out. And then the last thing I was going to talk about was the African part. So we talked a lot about the African American part and this conversations and learning about the roots. It's difficult for you to learn about your roots if trying to go over there, and there's very difficult access. And access is just incredibly difficult. Like, where do you start from? Where do you go? How do you get the visa? Where do you stay? And it's so difficult. And I feel like with technology, I think that would help bridge the gap between, both sides.
That's good.
I think overall, like the way that we treat each other and the ways that we interact with each other, Recolonization. They do. And that's why I think it is necessary for us to bridge the gap. Because as long as we don't, we're going to be acting in a way that continues to do us all a disservice by keeping us within like the confines of the ways that we were initially meant to be divided. I don't think that we have the same capacity and the same ability to achieve the things that we're trying to achieve in terms of development and in terms of progress without utilizing each other as resources. And without using each other to surpass, like I said, those confines of the things that have been holding us back for hundreds of years.
Thank you so much. I think we're getting into some really profound things here, right? So I want to take that a little step further, but I want to take a brief moment to remind you to get food, and also to ask for forgiveness because I've not been very hospitable. Clarence, if you would, could we get some waters for our guests up here? Well, I mean, you're my vice president. So let's get maybe. We can do 6. I'll take one as well.
Take my time to shine all my life. Get on TV. There you go. You do that? You guys have been killing it with the answers and the responses. It's been deep.
All the way down there.
There you go. One. Oh, everybody straight? Thanks, man. That's what I do, water boy.
Thank you so much. I wanna touch back on the structural. I think we have maybe two or so questions, 2 or 3 questions left from the thing before we open it up to the audience here. So thank you so much for your responses. I wanna see if we can dig deeper into the structures we're talking about, right? And I think Mickey's last response was pointing us in that direction. But what are these structural institutional barriers that we are actually facing that are impeding this unity? We mentioned the media briefly, and we spoke about the legacies of colonialism, but there are some things that are legacies, right? What are some of these things that we are actually dealing with that are?
I think in terms of like the African part of it, I think this idealization of white supremacy. I say that only because I personally traveled to Nigeria 2 years ago. Had a great time, it's always good going back. But the way that Africans idolize the white man, like it was mind blowing to me. Like compared to anything. Oh, like there's a white man, there's an Oyibo guy here, yada yada yada. Like they're going to give us the life. Like just connect with them. They got the businesses. They own the big industries. They just like the whole idealization of white is right. However, I don't want to put everybody in that same box, but I'm speaking in general from like what I've seen and what I've seen with my families, that they fail to realize that these are not the only people in power. You know what I mean? We still have African Americans who are doing big things that you can have connections with, build connections with, and become just as successful as the fellow white man. Of course, we are, oppressed, and we have struggles that we have to deal with compared to, white people. However, though, like I feel like minimizing or trying to minimize that concept of white being a high power in Africa can definitely take a step into dabbling into like us as a whole. I don't know if you guys get what I'm trying to grab.
It's a tough question.
Yeah.
It's a very tough question. Yeah. You take it on first.
Yeah, I think largely it just has to do with who drives what the definition of success looks like, and who drives what the definition of development looks like. And I say that because, why did I lose my train of thought?
Take your time.
You can ask the question again.
Ask it again.
See, now you're putting me on the spot because I ask you and I forget it.
I was asking what the very real structural or institutional challenges to solidarity are. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Also, so just historically, in terms of thinking about, especially positioning like America versus other countries throughout the world, countries outside of America that are seeking development and seeking progress and like technology and economy and things like that, really mostly the Western countries are the ones who hold the tools and who hold, or we see them as holding the tools and holding the power and being able, like that's how you gain access to economic success, and that's how you gain access to development and things like that. Even historically, like stuff like the World Bank. If you want to get funding to fix XYZ, okay, we'll give you the money as long as you do it our way. And so I think that we have a pretty rigid idea of what it looks like to function within these structures, and it takes a lot to be able to escape them just because of, it's like if you don't go based off what has already been established, where do you go and what do you do?
Yeah, and just to piggyback off of that, I think what makes it harder is when, say, you're coming here for the first time and in your communities or in your, wherever your sphere is, you don't see African Americans thriving, and if you only see white people in power, it's going to perpetuate this narrative that we're not successful, we're not hardworking, we're lazy, you know, I just think that it's so hard because the media does play a role in that as well. And so if you see it, even in schools or your communities, you hear about it and you're not exposed or you don't have access to, you've never met any African Americans in any positions of power, then you're only, the only way to change that is to do like your research. So I wanted to throw in a resource that I hope is on the list, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. How many of you have read that book? I read it in a civil rights class and it changed my entire perspective of what I think about Africa and how I understand just systems of power, economy, and things like that. So I recommend everyone to read that book, Africans and African Americans, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa.
I'll add it to the list.
Okay.
You added to the list. You added
Yeah,
to the list.
yeah, I'm going to add it
Okay,
to the
that's
list.
for sure.
Anyone else want to say something else?
I'll say something.
Okay.
I was just gonna say before, as Tim interjects here, to the point that Joe made earlier about the holding high of white supremacy. It's a funny anecdote from a few weeks ago, and I was sharing it with Jayla. You know, I was talking to a friend of mine, you know, a very good, well, probably my best friend. You know, he lives in Zimbabwe still, and he meets with some people that we used to know back when we were lames, if you will. But you know, some of our friends we had problems with. I was like, oh, what did they say? It's like, oh, they asked how you were doing. I told them you were doing well. I told them you were dating a white girl. That's what they said, right? I was like, I told them you were married to a white girl. I was like, what? So first of all, that's what drives it home to tell them that I'm doing well, right? But I'm like, you know who I'm dating, right? And objectively speaking, there's nothing you cannot, that is all the things you should be proud of, right? Educated, beautiful, from a great family, you know, all these things, right?
Yeah.
And this is Jayla, by the way, if anybody's wondering. You know, and, but again, so it is more impressive to talk about the idea of this, any white woman, you know, that, but it speaks to that, right? So anyway, Tim, back to you, brother.
Yeah, that question is just, it's like a lot of layers. And like coming from like what I'm thinking about like religion, I'm thinking about like different cultures, but like I guess one of the things that I can add my 2 cents onto this is this idea of like this social construction of white supremacy being infused specifically from an African American standpoint. So for me, when I'm reading books like Carter G. Woodson, The Miseducation of the Negro, they're talking about how there's even African Americans who, you know, go to these prestigious universities and whatnot, but they're learning from a white dominant structure, and they think that, so like if you're taught that, so even if you're like, and this is gonna be a lot, but work with me. Okay, so this is like, even if you're you're like getting educated and you're like the top of your class or whatever, you're still learning from this pedagogy of whiteness, and you're still practicing whiteness, even if it's even if you're deemed successful, because here in America, what is success, or the American dream, is a house on a hill, or you know, having 2 kids or however many kids, and owning your own business or whatever, 5 kids, however many kids. But it's through this ideology of a Western European lens, right? So if you have to practice, it's like this idea of promoting anti-blackness in a way that might not be as overt as especially within the educational system. So speaking in the school system, even growing up DPS, if you're growing up in these schools and stuff, there's not a lot of Black history taught. So it's like Black history, there's not a lot of Black history taught outside of the like three figures like Dr. King, Malcolm X, Rosa Parks. You hear narratives about that, but you might not hear about W.E.B. Du Bois. You might not hear about Carter G. Woodson. You might not hear about these other people, Marcus Garvey, S.S. Liberia. You might not hear about these different things. So there's that problem within that space as well. But you take that and you take a community like Detroit, and this is not a narrative that I want to project on the entire city because there's a lot of people who are working together. But the predominant narrative is that Black people can't work together, and Detroit is a place that's being gentrified right now. But before the gentrification, there was a lot of poor, there was a lot of blight, there was a lot of abandoned houses, but it was Black people who weren't able to take care of their own. You go back to like Kwame Kilpatrick's, oh, he's depleting the city and all these scandals and stuff. But then even taking that and going to countries in Africa, and it's like all these African leaders after independence in the 60s and stuff like that, they can't take care of their own African countries because they're not capable and they don't have whatever's going on. So this narrative, this Western European narrative manifests not only in America, but globally on both sides. So since it's manifesting, we have to deconstruct that in order to advance and get anywhere in the conversation, because there's this crab in the barrel effect that goes on even here in Detroit, where it's like, oh, you doing this, oh, I want to bring you down. But that's a narrative that's shown, or that's a narrative that's everywhere, honestly, in terms of, oh, you shine, and it shouldn't be like that. We should want to be like, oh, because we rise by lifting others, you don't get anywhere by yourself. And going back to this idea of like Ubuntu is I am because we are. So we're talking about practicing interdependence. But here in America, it's a lot of independence, it's a lot of capitalism, it's a lot of making on my own and forget you. So if you're practicing this and you're coming out of these neighborhoods, you're not thinking about uniting, you're not thinking about coming together. So having these conversations in this structure is very important in order to come together in a way and to practice this interdependence that we're preaching about right now. In a way, so.
You forgot to do a mic drop. And after what you said, no comment.
That was good.
And I really like that metaphor of it seems to be used quite a bit, but of crabs in a barrel. And I'm not really partial to taking my wisdom from memes, but there's one meme that I saw like 4 or 5 years ago that has stood with me to this day, and it ties to that, which says, people like to say Black people have a crabs in a barrel mentality, overlooking the fact that the crab's natural environment is not a bucket. You know, so what are we doing in this bucket? So we've been captured, right? So it's a pretty interesting way of looking at it. And this is a response that this is a question that this is my second from last one on my list, but some of you started to answer it in the beginning. But it seems that a lot of your own views have changed over time. Can you go a little bit in depth about what facilitated, what made that possible, if we are to possibly prescribe what folks may need to go through? And I know the experiences will be different from everybody, but what did you go through that helped your views to change?
Well, for me personally, growing up, like previous stated, I was straight down the middle. Like I had a hard time, trying to figure out where I belong. My biggest thing was like self-identity. So like understanding and knowing myself, but also educating myself on both aspects. One big thing that really helped was me actually coming to college, and actually being around both parties and being in situations where we are united and where we can have these conversations, because we never, like me, middle school, high school, so on and forth. It was always cracking jokes and never actually sitting down and having dialogues about like where we come from and our cultural backgrounds. Is always, oh, you're an African booty scratcher, or oh, you're lazy. It was all. But once you come to college, this is the first time. These are the first times I'm put in like situations where I'm sitting down and we're actually having face-to-face conversations from different like points of views, you know what I mean? So that's how like I started like knowing my self-awareness and other people's awareness with like about the whole situation. So.
I think for me, since I was a military brat and I had grew up overseas, my journey was not necessarily trying to shift how I thought. It was actually to learn something I didn't know. Like to learn, I'll say this, in college, like to piggyback off of you, that was the first time where I realized that there were some Africans who have viewed African Americans a certain way. And I was just trying to figure out, why is it that a first generation, like Nigerian American, feels more connected to African Americans, and then someone who just moved here, why are they not thinking that we're the same? And then I was understanding, well, okay, well, like some of the cultural upbringings and the communities, and then the media and the distance from America. Like, how long have you been here? Have you been exposed to some of the Black history and things like that? And then, so me just being around people from different countries and people who have been here longer or who were born here, I started to understand why there were differences and why some people thought a certain way. But I feel like I started to feel more connected to African communities when I finally traveled to South Africa, to Swaziland, to Mozambique, and I was getting exposure to different cultures in Africa. And I started to learn we're not that different, you know, we're not, it's just like different states in America. You're gonna meet different Black people who have different cultural practices, but we're all the same. So I think it takes some of your own personal wanting to learn, because I would say that's one thing African Americans, I think we can do better with probably trying to learn more and going to Africa if we have that access, if you look for it, look for opportunities. And I think college provides a lot of these opportunities. So I took advantage of that, and now I'm looking forward to traveling more and learning more just from experience.
Yeah, this event is called Bridging the Gap. If you want to bridge the gap, stand in it.
Oh.
Stand in the gap.
Okay.
And that's why I was just thinking, like, it's funny. Like, Joe is on the e-board, and we have the same position, but he's on the e-board for BSA, and I'm on the e-board for ASU. I think that's hilarious, but it's also
that is awesome.
Yeah. But and while you're standing in the gap, stop worrying so much about having to do that thing that you're used to doing, where you have to defend yourself, and where you have to defend your identity, and you have to defend your history, and you have to defend your struggle, and start listening so that you can hear and feel and share and really understand what it is that each other is talking about. I really think that that's like where it starts.
Yeah, I think the listening part is key, because I know it's really easy when you might meet another Black person or African person, and they might not identify as Black because they weren't raised being called Black. It is really easy to get angry as an African American. You know, for me, I was in these moments and conversations, and I had to learn how to listen and be like, well, tell me why you think like this, or tell me why you have this perception of African Americans. And when I heard their story, I'm like, okay, well, that makes sense. You know, well, let me tell you my story. So let's share, let's educate one another. And it's gonna take some time, but communication is the key there and listening.
So I was actually going to make a point earlier, and I'm going to bring it up. We're also getting to a time where we're telling our own stories. Like, there are more Black writers in Hollywood. There are more Black directors in Hollywood. Netflix just signed a Nigerian actress to do a movie, Genevieve. So, like, we're getting, and I'm taking off of Chimamanda Adichie when she's like, we should learn to tell our own story and own our own story, but we haven't been doing that. But that is changing. That is actually changing. And to me, the closest thing I can see to bridging the gap, and I like to be practical, is actually music. I'm beginning to see a lot of collaborations between African artists and African American artists. Yeah. I'm beginning to see more African American artists going to Nigeria to perform, Kenya, Uganda. Then I'm looking at BET Awards, and BET Awards, it's changing. In fact, there was some beef with some artists that it wasn't included and things like that. I'm like, that's actually good beef, because they're like, we're all Black, and you're not recognizing my music. And I'm like, okay. They want to be involved. They want to be part of the culture. And and when you look at the music back in Nigeria, it's actually heavily influenced from hip hop and all of that stuff. So this is happening. And I think as time goes on, it's and with us being in this room, with us having this kind of conversations, it's already happening. The access is opening up, and it's only going to get better. And I think the community is pulling together, because I always tell my friends this, and everybody always thinks I'm crazy. I'm like, we gotta be thankful that Trump is president. Everybody's like, that's a crazy statement to say. And I was like, think about it. If you didn't have such a president that attacked the community so much, we wouldn't be polarized enough to unite. He crapped on African countries, he crapped on black people. So we're like, yeah, he called us shithole countries. He called you this. Okay, I guess, and guess what? We're beginning to have those, the polarization is so strong. The community is coming back together. So shout out to Trump.
This is live.
My only point that I wanted to say about the whole listening part is, it's gonna be quick. We have to listen to understand and not listen to argue. Like, we're in spaces where, like, okay, I hear you, but you know what I mean? I hear you, but this is how I. Right. And when you do that, you're just dismantling everything that the person has told you to defend your point, and we're not moving forward. That keeps us stagnant. We really have to listen to actually understand each other's point of view and perspective, than to listen to come back to what you're saying. You know what I mean? So that's just what I wanted to do.
I'm gonna say something real quick. It's not gonna be like last time. So just another thing is, in order to along with actively listening and listening, not to have an active or a rebuttal on the spot, you have to, in order to talk to people and have people have conversation about identity, you have to know your own identity. You have to know yourself, and that's a big thing in terms of this idea of this double consciousness. And it being okay, you have you're wearing two masks in a way. So in one way you're talking about maybe at home or in private you're acting one way, but outside of the home you're acting an entirely different way. So when you're talking about identity and you're talking to people who may not look like you, and you're speaking that is very important to kind of understand yourself and know yourself before you even engage in these conversations, because that whole thing. So if you don't, if you don't know yourself, then you really can't educate others on your experiences. And that's a big thing in terms of, like I said, I don't want to get too in depth, but it's a big thing to address this idea of double consciousness, and to address this idea of finding your own identity. And once you're confident or you're firm in understanding who you are as an individual, I think that the conversation can be more fruitful and more beneficial, and you can take more away from that as well.
Thank you guys so much. I've got one more question, then it's on to you guys. But I just wanted to mention to the idea that Obafemi was talking about the arts and music, and to remember that. I think Tim might have said this about, was it Tim or Joe, about the not being black not being a monolith unto itself. So even on the continent, right, where to me, growing up in Zimbabwe, the idea of Sudan was as foreign as Nicaragua or Ukraine, So these are things that but so when you're talking about that shift, I'm starting to see at least more than in my lifetime, collaborations between East and West and Southern African musicians, and sort of this blending of the sound that I hear something in Zimbabwean radio, I'm like, what is this Caribbean? Is this West or is this East African? And the sound is just sort of becoming this, but it's an awesome sound though. It's not just some blow. So
dance moves too.
The
dance moves now is from South Africa. Everybody's
right.
doing it.
And it's
circulated everywhere.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So the last question sort of brings it home. We started to draw the parallel between Michigan, as an MSU versus this other space and these things.
what do you make of the relationship between these groups at MSU, and what can be done to improve it? Let's talk about it within our very immediate space. Oh, don't get scared now.
Well, out of my 4 years of being here at Michigan State University, out of those state we still need some work. We definitely still need some work, and it definitely is a two-sided thing, I would say. However, though, I will not acknowledge the fact that we have had, programs or panel discussions such as this. I know Tim had his Ubuntu program, this program Bridging the Gap. Through my fraternity, Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, I had a black versus black program as well. So we have been, having these dialogues, but I feel like after we have those dialogues, it stops. After the program, what's next? So I feel like we need to, I don't necessarily know the solution. Maybe like follow-ups or something that's more consistent, or maybe another org that just combines the both, and we throw something together every time, and that's just like a platform for people to come out and say, oh, it's an African American and African thing, not so much this or the other.
Yeah, and since this is only my second year at MSU, I'll speak about my experiences here, which are similar to being at Eastern Michigan University, where I did my undergrad and my master's. It's difficult, I think, to see these collaborations because of the organizations that are established on the college campus, the African Student Union, the Black Student Union, the Black Graduate Student Association, and then if you do have the African Graduate Student Association. So there's already these separations, and I don't think there's enough of collaborations. We see these type of forums, like the dialogue, but not collaborations with just having an event. Like a Black Excellence Showcase, people might think it's just African Americans, but when we say a Black Excellence something, or we're doing a Black event, everyone needs to know, and I think maybe we should just do better with identifying that on our flyers, potentially, or the presidents of these orgs, making sure that they're reaching out to everyone across the diaspora, not just the African American centric groups. So there does need to be work on both sides, because having all these different organizations keeps us separated.
Touching on the point that Joe made, really what the idea that we're talking about is Pan-Africanism. And Pan-Africanism is not a conversation that you have, it's a way that you live. And I think that if we want to make that a truth and make that a fact, we have to work on thinking about what is our intention, what is our goal, what is it that we're trying to achieve, especially being at MSU, being at Michigan State, where we have access to each other, and we have access to resources, and we have access to information. Going to Africa is not something that if I wasn't at MSU, I cannot pack my bags and pick a country and go. That's not a thing. But being here, I have that opportunity. And so I think it comes down to when we're here and when we're in these spaces and when we are in this environment, what direction are we going in?
So I'm going to compare MSU to University of Maryland. And at Maryland, we had Maryland is just super diverse. You guys got to just check it out. Everybody's there. So we had the ASA, huge. In fact, ASA was so huge, the Ethiopians got mad and split off and went and formed ESA. We weren't mad, it was still big. We had the CSA, we had the BSA, we had everybody. But we had so much diversity that everybody was doing their own thing, and we had one event. And I think, I don't know what the event was, maybe the Afro-Caribbean Fest or whatever it was. Pretty much we all met at the same club and had a good time. So that's how we all came together. And but in Maryland, I never felt the need to be friends with other Africans because I was like, man, there's enough Nigerians here. I never felt the need to be friends with maybe other African Americans because I was like, I have such a strong community. So when I came to Michigan, and you know, in MSU, I look at the stats, I look at the numbers. I think there's like what? Is it like 5% African Americans in the whole campus?
Probably less.
Probably less. So this is the first time in my life that I'm walking across campus, I see a black person, I'm so excited. Oh my God. So it didn't matter to me if you're from Kenya or you're African American or whatever you are. I was just happy you were black. So then I went to the first African student gala. And I try to attend as often as I can. And I try to know the officers as often as I can. And I told the officer, I was like, oh my God, this is the first African gala that I've been to that actually integrates the African American and African experiences together. And I was like, this is amazing. But then I thought to myself that, of course, it's this way because there's not a lot of Africans or blacks or whatever on campus. So you guys don't have a choice but to do stuff together. So you're talking about like, you guys have the, your fraternity and the officer from the other one. We didn't have that, but you guys are such a small community that you actually are already bonded. So now the problem is what you already alluded to. What next? So yes, there are not a lot of us, so we have no choice but to be around each other. But what next? And that's a difficult question that I don't think, my only answer is like, unless everybody goes to the club, and then that's what next. So that, the music, you guys doing different kinds of music, different kinds of dances, kind of brings people together, different kinds of fashion and food and something that is common within both continents. They do enjoy music and food, and that might bring together the community to have a good time. And then Tim wanted me to address something he brought up earlier, so I'll address that quickly. And when he was talking about you need to know yourself and the double consciousness, and what I was going to push back on him was like, we're still struggling with our identity, bro. So but we're trying to, with him talking about he had a dual identity, I actually have that too. I struggle with my own duality and my own double consciousness. But it took me so many years to be comfortable to talk about it. But even though I didn't know, I was trying to figure it out. So I think it's healthy for all of us to start figuring it out. And learning out, using my own little knowledge here, your own little knowledge here, and then we can grow together. And not all of us are even as confident or as bold as you might be to say, this is who I am, this is what I like, and this is it. So
I agree with that.
It's like a journey.
Absolutely. I agree with
like
that. It's a journey. Yeah, it's a journey to get in there and stuff like that. And everybody has their own journey to get to that destination.
Boom.
But at the same time, like just taking that time out to develop it, whether it be you're cognitive of it or aware of it, cognizant of it, or
Yep. So that was about it.
Yeah, and I would agree with what you had said earlier. I think to get to that place, it's knowing that we can embrace our stories.
Yes.
And I love that has been a narrative, even outside of the college community. It's getting popularity.
Yes.
That whole talk about embracing your story. No one has the same story. I'll do a little plug for the first year writing program that we teach. RAC we teach in the first year writing, so everyone will come to that about your narrative and being confident about talking about your story and that your story matters, your experiences matter. So, I just think college, as much as, we do have these Western ideologies that we are learning from, it's a great learning experience. We have these moments, and it's a place where people are figuring it out. So we just have to continue to learn.
For sure. I was just gonna say one last thing. When I thought about it, I know I touched upon it before, but like I was just really sitting here and thinking about when you said what's next. When it pertains to Michigan State, it's really just consistency. It's really that's what I'm getting from this, is just being consistent and just trying to have things or gatherings that bring us together. Like consistently.
Absolutely.
And also, Monday we have our Afro Latino week through Alpha Theotis. So we do have a potluck, which is going to be we're gonna have African food, African American food, and Caribbean food and Spanish food. So that's another thing. It's going to be Wonders Kiva. So that's another thing on Monday where everybody can get together. Don't say I didn't say nothing while we having these talks.
Well, Joe, thank you for that plug, because I wanna come back to that and say, like, part of this resource list, at least in the short term, is I'm putting together all the programs that are represented by people here that are coming up. So on this resource list, at least for the next month or so, or I'm just gonna have this thing on there. It's not, I don't know how much it counts on the what next kind of spectrum of things, but it's something next. So we will have these books and this. I'll put what I want to do is put the social media of the different groups represented, then as well as the major programs, which we'll touch back on again just before we leave. I'll say this last thing before I open it up to the audience, which is an analogy. For a long time in Hollywood, there was no, until very recently, as of maybe like 10 years ago, there were no black and white couples on TV, right? This is an analogy. There were none unless the point was about that. You know what I'm saying? So unless it was like Guess Who, because the story is based around the racial, or if it's the one with Samuel L. Jackson giving the neighbors hell, this kind of Lakeview Terrace, this kind of stories, right? Or you might get one like Pulp Fiction, which is my favorite movie of all time, but you never actually see the couple together, but you see the guy and you see. And now we are starting to see some of these things happening, right? And then when the point, like a Get Out is still, that's the point, but you also see other shows like Happy Endings where there's these couples. I draw that analogy to say, when we're talking about working together in these spaces, right, we need to start doing it when the point is not that we are doing it. So you can do a black versus black sort of program. You can do this Afro-Latino sort of which are fantastic events. We can do the Bridging the Gap event, right? But when we start supporting each other, when the point is not to show that we're supporting each other, that's when we know that we have reached a new level. And I think a lot of it is going to come to sort of engaging in these different programs here. Then I just want to give a quick this. I kept thinking about this when I was doing this. I want to give and I take this from this is take this as nicely as you possibly can. I don't mean to be patronizing or nothing, but I just want to shout out the undergrads on this panel because maybe I'm selling myself short, but I do not remember when I was a senior in the undergrad being able to articulate ideas like this. I was listening to Mickey talk just now, and she's talking about Pan-Africanism. I'm just crossing off my list. I'm like, okay, I guess I don't have to talk about that. So much for this PhD on this thing. And then in the same vein, I want to acknowledge two fantastic programs that I've seen this year. There's been more that I wish I could have attended. I know Joe mentioned some, but two programs that I was able to be at that were phenomenal and that worked in this vein. The first one you've heard referenced a couple of times was Tim's Ubuntu event at the beginning of the year. Incredible. And I don't use that word like, it was phenomenal. It was phenomenal. Hundreds of people, food from the African American community, like 3 different food types, and I don't know, 20 different panels, and it was just fantastic. That's one. The second one was we have the president of the ASU here, Naomi, organization that Mickey also represents, and they put together the ASU gala a few months ago. And again, the same thing. Obafemi was there. We were bantering about some things. Dr. F. Young was. He was the keynote. Yeah. So, just an incredible event. So, to use an African American proverb, keep that same energy.
But yeah, I'll come around with the mic, and the mic is not necessarily for amplification, but it is because we are live streaming it, and we want our friends to be able to hear this. So, do we have any? Elijah. No, I'm saying like this is how it's connected to the live stream.
Oh. Mm-hmm. So I'm asking a question just in general or to specifically them?
Well,
it doesn't matter.
Yeah,
it doesn't matter.
Probably take a first crack at it.
So I preface this question with, is it on there?
Yeah, it's good.
Okay. I preface this question with me being 5 years of researcher, and I would say the biggest difference I've seen between African Americans is the word of nigger and what it means to the person and how you use it. I've seen a lot of people use like nigga in the context of like we all, somebody's house, they may say nigga, but we get around white people, they won't use it. So like, I guess the first question to the group is, how do you engage with the word nigger or nigga? It's something that you don't talk about, something you engage with in your own community, or use it just explicitary everywhere?
Well, yeah. You guys go.
I'll just start. I don't like the word. I don't like because of the origins of the word, and even though we've like taken it back and used it, I personally don't use it. And in spaces, if I hear it, I'm not going to degrade someone because they're using it. I don't use it, and that's the way I continue to show that I don't like that word, because you will never hear me use that word.
You called me nigga last week.
He is lying.
I'm guilty as charged. I use the word nigga, but even though like the origin, it's if you want to keep it black and white, we shouldn't use the word like regardless of how we perceive it, because where it's derived from and how it's degrading, like how the original word is degrading to black people. However, I feel like in the sense that we just kind of adapted the word as our own, kind of like a comfortability type thing, like what's up, like you my peoples type stuff. Like we try to like change the word into something positive. So I think it's just more so not, I don't know the term, but like I don't look at it as a perspective of this word is derived from here, so don't use it. I feel like I kind of just flipped it into something positive. Even though I do understand that, like I understand that how it could be not good for us, like for me to use personally, but I don't think nothing of it when I'm using the word with my people, you know what I'm saying?
Was your question also though, like if you're around white people, is it okay for them to use it, or do you say something if they use it?
No, my question is, for example, when I was an undergrad, I was in McNair. They put up McNair. McNair's a trio program, a pipeline, BA to PhD, and I had a few African friends, and they were like, "Don't say nigga around white people; they get offended." So it's more about when you're around white people, you try to change your language of using nigga instead of saying like black person. So like generally, how do you use the word nigga? Nothing against with white people, just how do we use it?
I don't use that word around them anyway, period.
Does anyone else want to touch on that?
I'll touch on it.
Okay.
They don't need to.
So I wouldn't necessarily talk about the word, but I'll just talk about code switching. And I feel like you just change. Like we do that all the time. All of us do. And when you're around your friends, I remember like I think I don't know. I think my wife was like she was like cracking a joke on me like, yeah, when you're around white people, you're different. When you're around Nigerians, you're loud as crazy. And then when you're around African Americans, you talk cool and all that stuff. So I'm like, man, I'm just trying to survive, man. You know what I'm trying to say? It's really survival and code switching. And I understand that word is a very very interesting word, but it's a word that the meaning changes depending on what community you're in. And some people use it around white people just because it's a form of way to say, I can do something you can't. It's like an empowerment to them. Listen, I can say something that you cannot say. and I'm gonna keep saying it in front of you. And the moment you say it, I will, you know. And you know that's what some people take it as their own space. I own this space. You can't tell me what to do in this space, but you can't do it. You know, and then some people are not like, and the African that probably told you that is probably the African that looks up to white people as white saviors. So let's not do anything to upset the white person because, you know, they're just absolutely fantastic. They're Jesus. So, you know, we have to take all of that into consideration. The code switching, survival, and how the word empowers some people. That's the way I look at it.
So to rebuttal to that, not to be a devil's advocate.
Okay, no, that's cool.
I feel like you're kind of doing an avoidance of it in the sense of
yes,
like you want to do Booker T. Washington or Du Bois versus them two, or Malcolm X versus Martin Luther King. It was like aggressive or non-aggressive. And like you're kind of going like, you know, we'll just be nice to people. But attest to Jayla, who's in my department. I am very much a nigga in my department. I say what I want, how I want it. Jayla would not do that. Jayla's more the conservative side. She'd be reserved. I go in and say what I want to say because I feel like people who's behind me, for example, like Tim, I'm very involved in his life. I want him to be very successful. I tell him, be who you are. Me, I go in my department just like this. Aaron, I don't care what they gonna say to me. So it's simple of like the word niggas. Like, are you gonna keep hindering us from being who we are, or are you gonna let them keep hindering you for what you want to be?
Okay, so and that's, you know, what you brought up is great. But what you're talking about isn't necessarily about the word. It's just your attitude. I could go dressed up to my department wearing like an African outfit because I'm proud of who I am. You know, and today I have my M on for manners, for minorities in agriculture. I wear it to my department. I'm letting you guys know that, hey, I'm with them, you know, and they're like, oh man, you with those people. So, you know, it's, you know, the way you described it is you saying, I just go the way I want to go. I say what I want to say. The way you behave is not necessarily, in my opinion, doesn't mean that doesn't fit into definition of that word. Right. That's you. You get what I'm saying? And Jalen, is that your name? Jayla. I apologize about that. Jayla is Jayla. You know, she's different. She's who she is. And you know, and some people even in your department or whatever department might see Jayla and be threatened. And you know, and so it's such a complicated word. It is very and we all have different experiences. But I'm not trying to code switch or diminish the word or whatever. You know, I'm just saying like it's you, be you, and that's what you're saying.
So another question I don't know. So would you have like a
no.
Okay.
Hold on.
I'm sorry.
Is it in the same vein? If it's in the same vein,
let me ask the question. Yes.
Very decisive and consistent. So with that, if you have an undergrad, or not even undergrad, just a regular person walking down the street who don't understand the word of nigger, more of socialization, just a word you just use to befriend people. How do you explain that to them then?
Repeat your question again, please.
So basically, if someone's socialized to say the word, opposed to know the meaning of the word, how do you explain that this is just being them opposed to a meaning of it? So like, feel like if you go to, I'm not gonna say Detroit, I say where I'm from. You go to New York, you go to like the 19th ward, and you say nigga this, nigga that, nigga that. They don't really know their background, so they just, you know, use it because everybody else uses it. So if you're socializing to it, how do you get away from that? Or how do you, like, what is that about then?
Does anyone in the audience have a thought on that conversation as well?
I just want to chime in too on that, just because I have a couple of things, and we'll go to Joe. The first one is I want to put it in a global context, which is I have some very beloved borderline conservative friends on the continent who use that word, right? But it goes back to what we were talking about earlier about the fact that the history hasn't been taught on that level. So even while from an informed position, you can still argue to use that word or not use it. The word comes into our lexicon primarily. How does it come into an African lexicon? Through rap music, through media like that, right? So identifying with it is through that. And so when I'm talking about it with my boys without the historical context, I'm talking about it how I got it, right? So that's the first thing that I want to sort of talk about with that word, sort of putting it in a global context. The second one is a lot of times we talk about it because of the way it's been repossessed or repurposed in the U.S. as if this is an unique to the African American experience. This is not true, right? Because if you were in the islands and there were English speakers, they were probably calling you that. In Zimbabwe and South Africa and Kenya, sort of this place that were settler colonies of the British, we were niggers too. So it doesn't, it is, yeah, it's a very complicated, and so, are you chiming in on this one, or are you going to have the question? All right, so I want to come to Naomi first because I saw her hand up. Yeah. Sure?
A different.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying like, cause yeah, I've seen it.
Hi everyone. So thank you all for a great conversation. I came in halfway, but I'm glad that we are having these conversations, and it's amazing to me because in the past 3 years I have seen us become more intentional about having these conversations, which is something that is really exciting, and I can't wait to see what we do. So something that I wanted to kind of talk about is Africa Week, which is coming up. So this is the year of Global Africa, and Africa Week is coming up the last week of March 24th to 29th. So I want to request all of you to please join us. We have some exciting events coming up, and I know I talked to BSA. I and Miracle have been trying to work on doing more collaborations together. So if you can that week, please don't do any other major events, and come support the events that Africa Week is going to be having, and we will be sharing that with you all, and we hope to see you there. So, yeah.
Thank you so much, Naomi.
So first, I want to say I don't go to this school. I'm a PhD recruit, and Jayla's my buddy for the RAC program. I'm from Florida State. But I think this is amazing work that you guys are doing, especially how you're looking at the differences between what Black means in America, and looking at challenging the conflation of those different cultures and identities and languages and things like that. And that's something that I'm very interested in, because as someone who's Jamaican but doesn't look like it, I'm often having to kind of defend my Blackness to a lot of people, especially people who are in the Black community. I have to defend where I come from and who I am and things like that. And so I want to know if you guys can kind of talk about performance and Blackness, especially in America, when there's a lot of stereotypes surrounding what it means to be Black. So how do you navigate that performance of that racial identity?
I can speak on that real quick. So I'm glad you brought that up, because for me, like I said, I'm from Detroit, but then I moved to the suburbs, Grosse Pointe, which is an all-white area. So when I moved to Grosse Pointe, I went from being like fitting in and feeling cool or whatever, and accepted, to going to a place where they're like, oh, you don't act Black. And this is from white people, because it was like, so I'm around these people, right, and they're like, you're not acting like, you know, like I was an athlete, but it's like, oh, but I was smart as well. So it's like, you shouldn't be smart, you should be one or the other. And then it's kind of like this idea of like, oh, you speak proper, or why are you in AP class? Why are you the only Black kid in AP classes? And it's like, should you be here? And then I have like a 4.2 or something. It's like, did you cheat on the test or something? So like that. And then also going back into like my own community. Like when I came here my freshman year and I lived in the dorms and stuff like that, there was this, like a lot of my friends were from Detroit. And like my 3 friends, they got kicked out after freshman year because they were grades and other things. But I was around another group of guys, and it was kind of like, you're not speaking Black, or you don't act Black. So I kind of got it from both sides. And it was kind of like this thing. So I addressed it, and one of the things is like we addressed it with white people. It's like, oh, you don't act Black, but like also addressing it within our own community, because that's a big thing. We kind of isolate ourselves and kind of separate ourselves amongst one another, and that's a big thing in terms of, well, for me, my personal experience, that's been a big thing in terms of, oh, if you're smart, then you're not Black. But why can't Black and smart be synonymous with one another? They don't have to be antonyms in a way. Or you lose it, yeah.
I definitely agree 100% because I'm a product of that same situation. But I do want to also mention just us or people in general, including white people, but black people not being ignorant to colorism. Like, we gotta understand that blacks come in all different types of shades. Like, we can't make, like, honestly, I would be guilty. I'll be guilty. I would have never guessed you're Jamaican. You know what I mean? Just off of skin tone alone, which is something that we need to understand, that like those preconceived, like, you know, stereotypes is what like causes the problem of the overall like archie of blackness. You feel me? So we really have to dismantle the fact and make it known that all black people come in different shapes and forms and shades.
Man, that's just such a good question, because I feel like I actually don't think I've ever really talked about this, but even growing up overseas, the black students would hang out together, and I always kind of felt like I didn't fit in just because of how I was raised and just some differences within my family, and I would be called an Oreo at times. You know, people would say I speak too white, and I know inside I think I struggled with that. I didn't feel like I had to perform, but I struggled with like feeling like I fit in with black people. And I feel like it wasn't until college that it was more accepted to just be you, even though there still are those tensions. But definitely growing up, you know, it's like you either are too, within the black community, if you speak a certain way, you act a certain way. Why are you trying to be white? And why are you trying to act like this? So I think we need to understand that all black don't act one way. And if you don't listen to rap or hip hop, there's nothing wrong with you. I love rap and hip hop, but I like all other genres as well, you know? So I think there's tons of work to still be done when it comes to that.
I'm seeing 3 questions. Dr. Effiong, Joram, Clarence. Is anybody else? Sadiq? Anyone else? I think that's gonna be all our time. So let's take those 4 questions for sure. Then we'll.
So while you're going over to him, I was going to address the Jamaican lady. By the way, we're no longer know about Jamaica.
Huh?
You know, Jamaica has Indians, Chinese, all sorts. So you have to forgive people on the outside that don't know the history and the colonization that goes behind it. Just like you go to Brazil and you see somebody as white as snow and as dark as I am or something. So yeah. But yeah, that's it.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much. I really learned a lot. That's what I came here for. And I want to thank you. But I have a quick comment and then a question. And I don't want to digress too much from the conversation here, but Leila had said something about being in a situation where she didn't understand why people just didn't connect. I think it's important to recognize that this behavior doesn't necessarily start in the US. Some of us already have learned to create boundaries before we even come to the US. In some of our countries where there are so many ethnic groups, we already create those boundaries. So if I have a problem connecting with Obafemi because he's a Yoruba man and I'm an Ibibio man in Nigeria, why would I come to the US and connect with someone from Zimbabwe or an African American or someone from the Caribbean? So I think it's important to note that. The other thing is, I really learned a lot from the points you made about where this problem starts, some of the roots, cause of the problem, and a lot of what you have identified seems to be external forces. But at what point is it necessary to now look internally and carry out some kind of self-examination? Because sometimes, it's not, CNN is not going to go anywhere, and they're not going to change. So at what point am I putting boundaries, creating those boundaries, rather than having those boundaries being created for me, so that my misconceptions about African Americans or people from the Caribbean prevent me from actually connecting? So I'm curious to know what you think about the importance of self-examination in spite of the external forces. Thank you.
Man, thank you so much for your comments. I think the moment we become exposed to some truth, even if it's just a little bit that pushes against our preconceived biases or understanding stereotypes, that's when you're held responsible. There's a saying, you know, once I knew better, I did better. And the beginning you start to learn something, you're held responsible because you've been exposed to that. So you're 100% right. The media is going to keep doing the agenda of the media. And we do need to begin to look internally once we've been to an event like this. You know, we can't leave here the same way.
What was that word again? You said it started with an E. Was that exposed?
Exposed.
Exposed, okay. I have to write that down. Go home with that exposure. Get out of your comfort zone. Read something.
Yeah, I believe that has to do, at least what Tim's comment about identity and understanding your own identity, what it made me think of is kind of what your question is alluding to, and understanding the ways that informing your identity, maybe is what I want to say. We need to inform our identities and understand that the ways that we perceive ourselves and the ways that we perceive each other do come from somewhere. We didn't just wake up one day and just like start deciding stuff. And so once we do recognize that, it's like, okay, is this what I want to accept, or do I want to break this down and kind of take a different route in my mentality?
I was going to say one quick thing from personal experience. It's basically dismantling the labeling theory. So basically, when people are telling you, oh, this is what you are, this is what you are, this is what you are, you start being like, well, damn, I guess this is what I am. Once you do that, that's increasing these stereotypes and making it like, you know, more in depth. We gotta really dismantle that labeling theory. Like, know your true self, your self-worth. No matter what we say about each other, that's not real. You know, that's not what it is. You know, we gotta focus on the positive side of this.
Yeah.
I want to talk about equity.
Okay.
So this boundary stuff, I get what you're saying. Equity plays a big role.
Yeah.
Huge role. A Nigerian man is willing to be friends with a white person. Why? Because he's looking at the white person as rich. And in Nigeria, there's so much poverty. So they're like, yeah, I want to be with that. I want to be that person. Forget we're different. We don't speak the same language. We look differently. I want to be that person. Over here on this side of the ocean, or the isle, or whatever you want to call it, you know, let's talk about equity. The access that a lot of African Americans have, depending on where you live, is vast. If you live in a county, I don't know much about Detroit. Let me talk about I can talk about this area. If you grew up in Okemos as a black person, and you grew up in some parts of Detroit as a black person, let them go that far. You go to Lansing, my bad, my bad. I was like, let me go with where I've lived and I know, you know. A black person in Okemos and a black person in South Lansing are not going to get the same equity. So the way they're going to look at it is going to be different. So internally, it starts from there. So if, you know, a black person in Okemos is like, okay, I can evaluate myself and what role do I have to play in my own identity, because I'm being educated about that. I'm going to schools about that. I'm around like people that look a little bit different. In South Lansing, I'm thinking about my mom. You know, she's on welfare, or I gotta take care of this bill. I'm gonna go home. I might be exposed to some things so I don't have time to think about boundaries. I'm thinking about survival. And that's what it is. So what self-evaluation am I gonna do? I'm thinking about, how am I gonna get out of here? And I watch TV. What do I see? I see rappers. I see basketball players. How can I be that person that looks like me and get out of this situation? And then in Nigeria, you know, as I said earlier, white is rich, so I want to be white. So I don't think we have time for self-evaluation, but I hear you though.
Which is why I think the word I used earlier, exposure, and someone had talked about earlier, technology is going to be like the key to help, because I think technology is helping expose, you know, and dismantle some of these stereotypes. We put Black people in a box. We're now be able to see our excellence and being able to see Black people who are successful through technology. So I think that is one way that's going to help us be more reflective of our own mindsets and thinking.
Sorry, I want to say something about technology. We also have to be careful about technology because technology is getting to the stage where it's actually isolating us. So, you know, the search history in South Lansing is going to be different from the search history in Okemos, and they're going to give you what they think you need. So they already do that, yeah. So that's another conversation for another day.
All right, folks. Let's. Nshona would say ga, which is let's get to it. We have a few minutes left, and I really want to make sure that we get Joram, then Sadiq's question. So if you need the responses, and I'm gonna, guys, hold on. Hey, hold on. I'm gonna make an announcement. I'm rushing to the end so I can announce about these events. So please, just give us a moment. All right, please go ahead.
All right. I really think everything has been talked about, and coming from Dr. Fiong, I think that's exactly how I was going to go, off. So we have talked about the things, but one thing I would love us to, this is just something for us to reflect on. Is this friction really there? Ask yourself that, reflect on it. Or it is something that we think, is there, but really isn't. Have you gotten to a point where you've tried to really engage, with, either an African or, a Black person in America, and actually they haven't engaged, So why am I saying this? I think most of the times I've gotten to a place where I think people can, touch us like a switch. A word was mentioned there, and it sets off lots of things. When will this stop? When will we be comfortable to be called, by the N word, for example? Just like, well, it's part of my history, and I have to deal with that. And lots of other things that happen. Why is it that when somebody says, oh, you don't act like them, it sets you off? Those are kind of the things I'm thinking about. That have we dealt with our own, kind of internal things? Or are we, and I just, I don't know, so things like that. As in, we have to get, I think we have to get a little comfortable with certain words in order for us to engage. And it has been, mentioned in there that we can't engage constructively if we are going to be defensive. Part of, getting to that conversation is, looking internally. And to me, it is that point where you hear that voice in you. There is always that thing that will tell you, this guy just got me, and, you go into that mode, and you've been operating with it over time, So I think that's the only thing I'll add here, that I think we just have to live like human beings, white, black, or anything. Like, we have to reach a point where we have to engage in these conversations with a very, comfortable kind of tone. Like, coming from Uganda and sitting in here, I wasn't looking at, any division. Yes, I've dealt with whites, I've dealt with African Americans, and, everything. But again, like we say, the cultures are different. Somebody comes in, they will be reserved. They may not be, as outspoken as, there is, but they have their time. There are different categories of people. But I would challenge us to get to that point when we really engage and not looking at, the other party as in, oh, you're challenging because you say this. Well, I think that's when we kind of, get comfortable with all this talk, and I think we can move further. Yeah, that's all I wanted to say. Yeah.
And by the way, great point. And the reason why I wanted to take this one is I just had this conversation with a bunch of my brothers some guy just came from Ghana. This is my issue with folks that just came from the motherland. You guys don't have history of abuse. So because you don't have history of abuse, you're like, why can't we all just get along? And I told my African brothers, I was like, our African brothers go to Europe to go and play soccer. Till this day, they're being called monkeys. So if somebody's calling me a monkey, how do you expect me to sit in front of the person and have a conversation without the friction being there? I can't look at you thinking in my back of my head, thinking to myself that you're looking at me as a monkey. But we don't have that problem. I come from a predominantly black country, Nigeria. So I don't have the problem of somebody insulting me. So I didn't grow up with those insecurities that some people might have grown up with. But it's when we now leave our countries and then they start throwing monkey bananas at us. And we're not like, they must be crazy. They're not throwing it at me. But then when the media starts to add to that narrative, there was this soccer player in England. And the guy, he bought his mother a house. But then the white guy bought his mother a house. But they were like, oh, look at this soccer player. He's blowing his own money. But the white guy, he's doing right by his mother by buying her a house. They did the same thing. This is happening now. The word, the N-word, the reason why people take it the way they take it, once again, is historical. It was a word that demeans people.
Yes, but what I do, just a second.
Yes.
What I do, I understand that
yes.
history. But what I'm trying to say is, at what point do we get comfortable and kind of, say, well, you know what, I will actually address you.
Yes.
Comfortably.
I will get comfortable when you look at me as a person. I'm having a conversation with African Americans and Nigerians and Africans or whatever. I didn't have this conversation 21 years ago with black people because the way they treated me, they're calling me African booty scratcher, and then I was looking at them and calling them some names. But look at us, we're all in college, we all have degrees, or we're all trying to get a degree, we're trying to be intellectual or whatever. So we're in a safe space to have conversations like this. If you go to Detroit, and you go there and say, let's all get along, it's a different story. If I went to Nigeria and I said, no, let's all get along, it's a different story.
Obafemi, part of what I'm trying to say, I think you just made my point. But we have to get to that point when we can actually have that conversation. And part of it deals with introspection.
Yes.
Like, you really have to look at it like, let's just not get ticked off by the word. But I think, use it as a point to, to kind of, engage. And not just say that, I won't talk to you because you're calling so and so, but yes, there will be those cases. I'm telling you, you are going to go down living the things, in the world. But I think as people that have come to school, we ought to a little, distinguish ourselves in a way and engage very constructively by understanding and respecting and providing that ground. Yeah,
and that's what we're doing. And that's what you're talking about is what we're doing. But what I'm also trying to tell you is that it's not realistic. Let me tell you why it's not realistic. We're in a bubble. Everybody in here, all the Africans in here came from households that could afford them to come. Not all of us could make it over. Okay, not all. Some. Then African Americans also, no. And some from scholarship. Some African Americans also came from some, households that allowed them to come. Not all. But what I'm just trying to tell you is that in this bubble, we can all sit down and have those kinds of conversations. But outside of the bubble, when you're going through some of these frictions, you don't have that time to be like, let's be cordial. You feel insulted as a human being.
Can I just say something really
At the core.
Guys, is it 8 o'clock yet?
Yeah. We'll take it out in the hole and keep fighting.
My comment is, I think we can reach what you're saying, but until the same injustices are continuously happening, it won't happen yet, because we're still trying to fight the injustices. You might not see them, but they're happening every day. So there's going to be this friction. We can't have this cordial conversation. Yeah, we're trying to, but we're addressing so many other things and layers before we can just be comfortable with the conversation. We have to address the thing that caused us to be uncomfortable, because it's happening rampantly. So yeah, I think we're able to come together, but there's more things that we're addressing within that.
Yeah, guys, honestly, I think it's very, it's becoming unfair on folks who wanna get out of here and on Sadiq. So he's gonna do this and we'll keep this conversation going. This wasn't gonna be solved in one day. So go ahead. Let's give him the same attention.
Hi, my name is Sadiq. I'm actually from a different region from Chad, which is Francophone. So usually this conversation, when it's African, usually Nigeria, Ghana, they tend to dominate most of the distance, easily because the Anglophone country, English, they're speaking. So me coming from Chad, Francophone speaking country, the colonization system was different, so my experience with African American was completely different. We use the French curriculum to learn, so usually somehow they remove the story of the whole African American. So my first experience was coming here, getting engaged with them. So just like how you say you come to Michigan and you see black people, they get happy. So I think I came to the airport, I was traumatized by seeing a lot of white people at once. So when the first time I saw black people, I just ran to them, begin to speak to them as if they're African, because the concept of African American was really new to me. And also, I begin to see the tension as you go on, because they tend to differentiate you between them and then. And then now, the only information that you get about them is from the media, and then that tends to give you certain perspective. But then when you come to university, you begin to learn, and then somehow you tend to see like who is dividing this and doing that. I think the injustice African American face it. African are still facing colonization, neo-colonization right now, economics this in. And then it's a problem whereby we begin to fight between ourselves, where we lose the bigger picture. And I think these conversations are very important. Next time when you're doing, please involve people from maybe some Arab nation or Francophone nation, so we get different perspective. We're tired of Nigeria and Ghana ruling the conversation. Thank you.
No, thank you so much for saying that. And I want to say, not to say that I've got all the answers, but I'll have you know that the person that Obafemi ended up replacing was from Gambia. You know, so we had a Francophone. Then also Naomi was supposed to also be on the panel. She came in, but she came in a bit later. So we were thinking about some of these dynamics for sure. I want to just close out today. First off, let's give our panelists a round of applause, y'all. You know, it wasn't just eloquence that was on display, but just, you know, pure guts to have a conversation that people don't usually like to have. So I'm going to say this in closing, right? Just a couple of remarks. First of all, the insult African Buddhist scratcher came up a couple of times, right? Can I just say, of all the racist language you can use, that is the laziest Buddhist scratcher? Like, honestly? Like, yo, come on, man. First, it is so, it is ridiculous.
They did that in high school. Elementary class in Boys in the Hood, so get your facts straight.
Well, I mean,
it's an elementary joke.
Well, I mean, it's around, right?
It was funny in high school. I mean, I'm just saying. We had better jokes than in high school.
As it defends the racial epithets they use, we have better jokes than that. Okay, we can insult you better than that. So I just want, let's talk about a couple things, right? Guys, let's just keep it together. So we will have the resource list on here. I just wanted to say this, right? If we look at the birth of Pan-Africanism as a named idea, right? The first meeting which we can trace back this Pan-Africanism was not in Accra, not in Addis Ababa, it was in Chicago. This is the first meeting that we officially, I mean, we can talk about different points in which we can say, but the first one in 1893 was in Chicago, right? The one in 1900, which marked off the first of the conferences, that one featured, even though folks from Zimbabwe and Rhodesia at the time and South Africa weren't able to make it, but high on the list was the welfare of people. So we were represented in that space as well. In 1945, that's when it becomes continental with the Manchester Conference and Kwame Nkrumah and Jomo Kenyatta take. I say this to say, from the offset of Pan-Africanism, and by the way, the person who chaired that first one was from Trinidad and Tobago, Henry Sylvester Williams. I say this to say all members of the global black community, global African community, were represented in this movement from the beginning. So that is not something we should ever lose sight of. The second thing I want to emphasize is we shouldn't look at the existence of groups like AGSA and BGSA or BSA and ASU as being in conflict with each other. These groups are open to all of us, right? We can all be members of these groups. The reason these groups exist is for the same reason that you and I could be twins, right? But there's still going to be Obafemi time, right?
Yes.
You still going to need to get your affairs in order and this thing. So, for example, if something is happening regarding the recruitment of graduate students from Africa, for example, sure, BGSA can have our back on that. But that is something that African graduate students here need to take a lead on, right? And every now and then there's going to be something that happens within the black community here. And maybe that is our avenue to learn about it, right? But it is important that we keep working together. That uniformity and is not, unity doesn't mean uniformity. So we can be united without being uniform. We still have to take care of our own households, but still contribute to this larger village. So I just want to end on that note and thank you again for your time. This was not an easy conversation to have. The resource list, please, if you haven't signed into the sheet and put your email addresses on there, that's how I will share it. It's in the back. It should be in the back there. Also, I brought some books that are on the resource list from my personal library, so you can start to look over them a little bit. When I send out the resource list, there'll also be a 1-line, 2-line sort of explanation of why I feel like this book is. And if you're gonna send me stuff like you mentioned how Europe underdeveloped Africa, maybe you can send me with a note as well what is gonna contribute to the conversation. Rodney. Sorry. Yeah, indeed. And yes, so, and the very last thing I will say is, and you will see this on the list as well, we have great events coming up, including on Monday, the 26th, that's when your event is?
Oh, yeah.
What time?
7 o'clock.
7 o'clock. So it may run into conflict with this one. Are you this Obafemi?
Is that on Monday?
That's Tuesday.
Oh, is this Tuesday? Oh, perfect. So you can go to this. Then Manners has a program.
Yeah.
Africa and MSU, Researchers Bridging the Gap. They saw our name. I'm sticking by that. Now it just happened independent of each other. That will also be on there. So please take pictures of this flyer. On the 28th, which is the Thursday, right, Clarence?
Yes, sir.
There's Utando Equals Love. And this is Clarence showing off 4 years of his Zulu lessons. No, I'm joking. So this is going to be a great discussion. And they always have good food at this event. So please make it out there. What group is doing this, Clarence?
This is AAAS event, if you don't know. AAAS is the Department of African American and African Studies. We are a beacon of what you all have been discussing. We're the place where all those strings of Africans meet, even ones from Sri Lanka or Australia or Papua New Guinea. We're that place.
Then this, I can't overstate this one. We have the African Graduate Student Association Research Conference, but it's also open to undergrads. Throughout my time here, I came here for the African Tea Time. I heard awesome presentations all around, and we need you there. Please, if your work connects with Africa in any way, and you have done a research project, consider presenting at this conference. Let's make it big. It's going to be at Kellogg, and there's going to be free food and stuff. So, thank you guys very much, and take all the food.